So, when it comes to the pathologically lying, malignant narcissist and open fascist that is Donald Trump, the Republican Party is cowardly, full stop. And we talk a lot about cowardly Republican elected officials and conservative commentators on this channel, but we may have finally identified the most cowardly Republican politician in America, somebody who will not only infuriate the progressive left and the Democrats, but should also infuriate the MAGA right. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. All right, folks, I want to talk to you about a guy named Peter Meijer, somebody that I've mentioned in a previous video. He is relatively low profile. He is not a household name among politicians or Republican candidates. But I mentioned him in a video a few weeks ago, and the more I thought about him and the thing that we talked about, the more I thought we need to break it down even more. We need to talk about it even more because this man is an almost unique strain of cowardly, okay? So Peter Meijer, from 2021 until January 2023, served in the U.S. House of Representatives, okay? He was a Republican politician in one of the Michigan congressional districts. And even though he ran as a strident Trump supporter after January 6th, Peter Meijer, as a freshman Republican, voted, along with 9 others, to impeach Donald Trump, which was the principled, moral, courageous, correct thing to do. He joined the likes of Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, who also lost their seats. He did the right thing. And as a result, he was primaried in the midterms by a Trump-supporting primary contender, and he lost the primary. Therefore, he lost his election, and he left Congress in January. Now, he is running for Michigan's Senate seat. He wants to become a U.S. Senator from Michigan. And he was asked by a right-wing news host on Real America's Voice about that vote. He's like, listen, if you're running as a Republican, what are you going to say to MAGA supporters who know that you voted to impeach Donald Trump? And this is what he had to say.
Do you stand by the vote? Was it the right vote? Or would you say, look, maybe you made the vote in haste? Is there anything you could say to Trump supporters? Because, look, it's going to be an awfully hard sell for you to go to the Trump supporters and say, with your hat in hand, say, look, this is what happened. This is why I did it. Would you do it again?
I stand by it. My regret is that we had to have the vote in the first place. Obviously, I regret not being in the 118th Congress where we actually had a Republican majority and could move forward to have that same degree of accountability brought towards President Biden, who has done far greater things to bring disgrace to that office.
So think about that for a second. Peter Meijer says, listen, yeah, MAGA, I did vote to impeach Donald Trump. It was the right thing to do. I stand by it. Now, to my ears, I'm thinking, well, that's great. It's a very principled stance. Then he goes on to say, actually, Joe Biden has done infinitely greater things to disgrace the office than Donald Trump, who, as we know, factually and legally in the eyes of the court, is now a matter of legal fact that Donald Trump is an insurrectionist. Joe Biden has disgraced the office more. And in a recent interview with Politico, Meijer went even further and indicated that he will support Donald Trump if Donald Trump is the Republican nominee, despite standing by and not recanting the vote in 2021 to impeach him. You cannot square the circle. I want to break down some of the points in this interview. So the interviewer says, listen, when last we talked, I asked you whether you could support Donald Trump if you were the nominee in 2024, and you told me I have no idea how I could do that. Did Trump change or did you? And he said, Peter Meijer says, it's something I've grappled with. I think former Trump Attorney General Bill Barr's response has been, I'll jump off that bridge when it comes to it. I would say one of the things that's really changed between then and now is my frustration at the cynical calculation that I've seen on the Democratic side. So he's blaming Democrats for making him say that he'll support Trump. Doesn't make any sense. He says, listen, I don't think it's a controversial thing to say that Democrats have kind of salivated, or at least this was the case going back towards the middle of this year before Biden's poll numbers imploded, that they were salivating at the prospect of a Biden versus Trump rematch, thinking that given the president's weakness, his strongest chance of reelection was against Donald Trump. Then he goes on to talk about the Manhattan indictments brought by Alvin Bragg. He says, listen, I think people rightly view people across the spectrum view those particular indictments as quite spurious and politically motivated. And it's not just the timing of the classified documents investigation, because I think that timing, I don't take issue with the timing. It's just hard to know the fundamental substance of that. But when it comes to a lot of the January 6th related investigations, kind of election related investigations, then he trails off. Then he says, I'll put it this way. Even if this substance is not political, the timing of it could not have been more calculated in order to support the reemergence and kind of bolster Donald Trump. So he's like, listen, look at what you're making me do. You all, Democrats, are making me back a guy who I thought was so unfit for office that I voted to impeach him despite the political consequences. And I find him so eminently unfit for office, I stand by that vote. And yeah, maybe the investigations and the prosecutions have substance. So maybe Donald Trump, in addition to engaging in insurrection, also betrayed national, security secrets. Maybe he also did all these other things. Maybe he is a criminal. But the timing of it, Democrats are just kind of smug about it. Then, of course, part of the interview addresses that clip that we talked about. He's like, the interviewer says, you said Biden has done far greater things to disgrace the office of the presidency than Trump. What are those things? He says, well, I think they're far less dramatic, but I think more insidious. Let's just acknowledge that Biden did not come in with an overwhelming mandate from the American people to enact revolutionary change. It's not like the American people were speaking with one voice that they want you to dramatically overhaul the size and scope of the federal government. And yet they proceeded to introduce and force through the budget reconciliation process was arguably some of the largest increases in the role of the federal government done in a partisan manner. Joe Biden won the presidency by 7 million more votes than Donald Trump. He wasn't just slightly more popular, at least in terms of the popular vote. He was much more popular. In terms of the Electoral College, he won by the same margin Trump won in 2016. What are you talking about? And what do you mean in terms of overhauling and radically increasing the size of the federal government? Point to it. Of course, he doesn't cite examples. He's appealing to conservative buzzwords. Government is too big government. Biden didn't have a mandate and he's making government too big. When, where, and how? So then he says, I hold January 6th and the withdrawal from Afghanistan as singular moments of American disgrace with the way that execution was conducted. Okay? Well, it was Donald Trump who inked the Doha Agreement that set the stage for that withdrawal. He set the stage, he made the commitments, he inked the deal with the Taliban, he retrograded U.S. forces, he didn't oversee or allow the overseeing of where American equipment was going. He set the stage for that. And Joe Biden had to come in and execute. Why are you blaming Biden for that? And how is that comparable to January 6th? He's like, then he says, that you have the complete and utter disregard of upholding and enforcing existing laws on the southern border. He doesn't name any. As we've talked about, the policies, the manpower, the resources, the southern border are virtually identical from Trump to Biden with the exception of Title 42, but the court struck that down. And President Biden has been a bit less cruel when it comes to family separations, which is important. They should be even less cruel than what it currently is. So what are you talking about? Well, economic consequences from incredible deficit spending. Donald Trump deficit spent all 4 years in office. Then he says the ham-fisted way in which the Biden administration has approached governing. Again, no specific examples. He just says, is that as dramatic as January 6th? No. Do I think it will have far more insidious and dangerous repercussions in the long term? Absolutely. Then the interview concludes with this. The interviewer says, during his presidential campaign, Mike Pence said that anyone who puts himself above the Constitution should never be president of the United States. Do you agree or disagree? And then Meijer says, I would say I largely agree. The challenge becomes if you have two individuals who've done so, there's a lot more shades of gray. Biden has done so in less dramatic ways, and he's gotten much more of a pass from the media on it. I always play this fun game of where it's like, okay, how would the media reaction be to this if Trump was the one doing the exact same things? I'm frustrated by that dynamic, which I think is hilarious because I also play that game. How would people respond if it were Biden doing what Trump did? And of course, as we talked about, there is an asymmetry of expectation. If Biden said or did a fraction of the things that Trump said and did, not only would the right be apoplectic, but obviously the middle and centrist would be too. And I imagine even a great deal of the Democratic bloc as well, because even we hold our people to higher standards than Republicans. Even we grade Republicans on a curve. We shouldn't do that. We should have one standard for both parties and force them to adhere to it. and not grade anybody on a curve because we just feel compelled to create a false equivalence. But what Meier's talking about, in my opinion, is absolutely gross. And then you contrast those sentiments with the sentiments of somebody like Adam Kinzinger, who was also a Republican congressman, and also one of 10 who, like Meijer, voted to impeach Donald Trump. This is what Adam Kinzinger has to say.
Do you still consider yourself a Republican?
So it's a tough question. I do, only in that because I don't want to give up on that fight. I mean, this country needs two healthy parties, a healthy Democratic Party and a healthy Republican. So I'm not going to give up that title. A country needs a good conservative and a good liberal movement at any time in their lives. I still have the title, but I voted Democratic last election cycle. If it's Trump against Joe Biden, I'll vote Democratic this coming one. Because, Anderson, I really believe it's down to one issue on the ballot. And not taxes, not even abortion, nothing. The one issue is, do you believe in democracy or do you believe in authoritarianism? And I think that's the only thing we should be voting on.
Well said. That is the only sane, patriotic assessment. What Peter Meijer's doing is, again, he's trying to square a circle. He's trying to simultaneously say to MAGA Republicans, listen, I took a principled stance. I refused to recant it. Donald Trump did deserve to be impeached, which is why I voted to impeach him. But also, I don't like how Joe Biden's handling the southern border, and I don't like that he, passed the American Rescue Plan through budget reconciliation or whatever. These things are wildly asymmetric. Joe Biden is not, has never been, never shall be a threat to democracy. You can have perfectly legitimate disagreements with aspects of his policy. There are some even I have disagreements with. Sometimes I don't think he's gone far enough in terms of progressive radical policies. Obviously, conservatives have legitimate disagreements with him as well. But Peter Meijer has done something that I think is even more cowardly than Kevin McCarthy or Mitch McConnell. He's saying, no, listen, Donald Trump is a threat. I voted to impeach him. I'm not downplaying it. It was the right thing to do. He's a terrible person. But also because of these policy disagreements, I am perfectly willing to put this fascist back in power. Because, again, these certain policy disagreements. And also, as he said in the interview, if Donald Trump becomes president again, I've always been a critic of executive power, so maybe it will scare people into taking executive power seriously, and then we can work to undermine it. Now, he's a Republican, so he should know that the GOP is an authoritarian cult of personality that has no interest whatsoever in limiting executive power if Donald Trump is the one wielding it. So I don't know what the hell he's talking about. But as of right now, I've come to the conclusion that when it comes to Republican politicians, this man, Peter Meijer, whom you probably don't know about, but you definitely should, is the most cowardly Republican politician in America, and that's saying something. Let me know what you think in the comments.